Hi there. Welcome to 60 Matthews. I'm Matthew, and today I want to talk about gaming. Recently, I've made several videos documenting my journey into game development. So I wanted to do a video that serves two purposes. One, to give some kind of context into why I'm getting into this, and two, to explain why I think that it matters. So to explain why I got into game development, I wrote a book called A Kid in Kirlith. It introduces this magical world where you can do pretty much anything you want. I started out with the story that became the first book, but then I started world building more and more, and I came up with the idea for the series. Basically, each book explains another city that they discover. So for instance, the first book is called A Kid in Kirlith because it's about the main character discovering Kirlith. The second book is called Darvis and Her Dungeons, where they find this mining city atop a mountain named Darvis. The third book is titled The Way to Ragio, where they discover this metropolis megacity. Basically, I wanted to have a New York or Chicago in the Kirlith world. As I started to create these places and create the world and realize just how much these people could do, I realized that this story could transcend just the novel. I'll still have the main series of 6 books that explains where Kirlith is at today, but I want to go back and tell the story of how Kirlith was created, some of the prominent figures that have been in Kirlith's history. I want to go into the future and explain what happens to these people. I want to do series, I want to do comic books. Of course, I would love to see it as a movie, but I think that the ultimate way to experience this city is in a video game. So in the same way that the world of Kirlith started out with this tiny little idea, and then it grew and grew into this big, colorful world, the same thing happened with the idea of the video game. I wanted to make a huge, open world, sandbox, hack and slash, collecting, skating, racing, kind of ultimate video game that anyone would be able to pick up and play, where you can run around and hack and slash enemies if you want to, you can race, you can ride around and do tricks if you want, you can run around in the forest and collect stuff, where you can travel to Darvis and Ragio, where you can get things that you can't get in Kirlith, or if you like Darvis or Ragio better, you could just stay there and never go to the city of Kirlith. I want it to be all of these different things, but I want to keep it really simplistic, where anyone can pick up and play and immerse themselves into the world of Kirlith. Because that's part of the real magic of this series. Anyone can do whatever they want. You don't have to be born with magic. You don't have to have specific powers. All you have to do is drink this blue tea, and it gives you this magical energy so you can do whatever you want with it. So you, as the reader or the watcher or the player, you can get transported into this world and do whatever you want there. But here's the problem. That game is going to be incredibly difficult to create. And I didn't know anything about computers. I knew that there was this magical box that made things appear on the screen. To me, that was magic. So I knew that this idea would have to be very far in the future. But then I published the first book, and I wrote the second book, and I started to incorporate a couple of games into the second book. And that's what I'll talk about in the second part of this video. So I made a card game named Survival that you can play single player or multiplayer, and I made a game called Battlefield that you play with marbles, dominoes, and jacks. I had already created these games independently of the Kirlith world, but I wanted to find some way to release these games into the world. So, several years after I had the idea for making Kirlith into an RPG, I wanted to start the process of making this happen. Since I knew that it was going to be this massive undertaking, I started doing research into how to have a conversation with a game dev, because I knew nothing about computers, and I didn't want to go up to somebody who knew what they were doing and be like, hey, I have all these cool, crazy ideas, but you make it and you do it and you make it fun and you make it pretty and you make exactly what I have in my head, and then I'll get all the credit for it. I knew that conversation wouldn't go over well. So I started to do research on what actually goes into making a game. And in my research, I found so many examples of great games that were made by one person or a small team of people. And these are games that obviously it took a long time to make them, but they're not these simple mini games with stick figures. These were beautiful, complex, fully functioning games. And then I realized I already had these smaller, simpler games that I had implemented into the second book. And so instead of making this one giant, massive RPG, I could start out by making those, and then I could start to wrap my head around figuring out how to implement the Kirlith RPG. And then as I started thinking about how to create those two games, I started having more and more ideas of all these different games that I could create. But it's all in service of Kirlith. And that brings me to my second point, why I think all of this matters. When I was writing the second book, I had the idea to implement these games into the story somehow, but they had to serve the story. I didn't want to put it in there just to sell merchandise, or just to be filler, or just to make it more fun. It had to make sense to the story. So in the second book, they really discover two cities. Darvis is the main city on top of the mountain, and then a mile underneath the surface is another city. So when I was trying to come up with ways to introduce gaming into the second book, I realized that I could make both of these cities opponents, and they could be fighting each other. Sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically, but it started me down the path of thinking, why do we game? Why do we as human beings like to play games? Is it because it's fun and we're bored? Is it because we want to hone our skills and train? Is it because we're prideful and we like to gloat? What is it? The main reason why I wanted to question this is because the world of Kirlith is made up of mostly animals. Magically enhanced animals, but animals nonetheless. And there's a spectrum from like tiny little field mice with very little intelligence to cheetahs and buffaloes. They can talk, they can think, they have hands. In every way, they are just as capable as a human being. But I don't think that me as a human plays games for the same reason that my dog does. And with that same trail of thinking, I started thinking about why animals game. Is it because it's like a survival of the fittest thing, where if they don't train and become physically fit, then they'll die off? Is it because they get bored? Do animals feel pride and feel like competing for bragging rights? All of this thinking was just one rabbit hole that I still haven't found my way out of. I could go deeper into this rabbit hole, but I won't. I think gaming is just inherent in being a thinking being. And I don't just mean video games, by the way. I don't just mean Call of Duty and Fortnite and Minecraft and Tetris and Bejeweled. I mean basketball and baseball and cricket, every single event in the freaking Olympics, football. I mean, the Super Bowl is one of the biggest things ever, and that's a game. I personally love to watch professional climbing and skating, and it's weird how we connect our personal experience to people who play games. Like when I watch professional climbing or the Super Bowl, I am screaming at the television. I had to stop paying attention to statistics and teams of the NFL and college football because if my team lost, I would be furious. I would have a terrible experience, all because some dude across the country didn't catch a ball. Like, that's weird, right? I currently live in Birmingham, Alabama, which is kind of in the middle between Alabama and Auburn. And if you think that your state has a rivalry, I'm sure you do, but you ain't got nothing on them. These people are serious. Even if they never went to the University of Alabama or Auburn, they still connect their personal experience with their team. It will spark arguments, actual fights. It can break up friendships, relationships. It's serious. And why is that? Why do we as human beings who can send people to the moon, who are trying to fight global warming, who have created the freaking internet, why do these same human beings care about other people throwing balls to one another? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that it's really interesting. And it gave me plenty of ideas to implement gaming into the second book of the Kirlith series. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, stay tuned, because Darvis and Her Dungeons is coming out later this year, along with those two games I was talking about. And eventually, I will create the entire world of Kirlith in video game form. But for now, that's all I have for this week. I hope you enjoyed this journey down the rabbit hole of gaming and how weird we humans are. Stay tuned to see all the cool stuff that's coming to Kirlith and 60 Matthews. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.